Hi everyone, welcome back to See Today Business. As previously mentioned, we're going to have our first talk show discussion, and this time is about the rising rice prices that might lead to inflation. And as we know, rice prices have continued to soar, and most recently hitting nearly 14,000 rupiahs a kilogram, as reported by Statistics Indonesia. And global prices also jumped to a 15-year high after a top producer's India's decision in July to ban exports of non-basmati rice, with other factors, including extreme climate conditions, contributing to the situation. Now, some have said that this surge could propel inflation to the forecasted 7% by the end of the year. Joining us today to offer his insights on the link between rice price and inflation forecast is Permata Bank Chief Economist Josua Pardede. Thank you so much for coming this early morning, Pak Josua.
Thanks for having me as well.
Yes, so now with price peaking at 13,500 this month, almost 14,000, what's your take on the factors influencing the recent price surges in rice?
Actually, the rice prices during June to September, which is actually the planting season, is actually a seasonal cycle. However, there are several specific factors that lead to the increase in the rice prices. Yeah? From the supply side, we know that the El Nino risk that also affect the crop yields. And then from the demand side, I think from the increase in the rice consumption, as the public mobility continue to improve at the end of the pandemic. And then the third one is a lack of utilization of the La Nina period in the last 3 years to boost the domestic stocks of rice. And then lastly, I think the policies, as you mentioned, the policies of some countries that have called for the ban on rice exports. I think those factors that affecting the rise in the rice prices.
Are you forecasting that this is going to sustain until 2024?
I think it depends on the El Nino, yeah, because we know that intensity of El Nino is higher and lasts longer than previously anticipated. I think this will result in decreased rice production, yeah, in the upcoming early next year harvest season. And furthermore, if the government fails to maintain the rice supplies through imports and then fail to control the price through market operations against the background of the improving demand, I think this will lead to the increase in the rice prices continue, yeah, in the beginning of next year until second quarter of next year. Because in our study, there will be some kind of lag time. So between the peak of the El Nino, there will be some kind of 6 to 9 months of lag time of the peak of the food inflation. So we are expecting that in the second quarter of next year, the food inflation will peak because of the El Nino.
Now, speaking of inflation, even this year, right, Statistics Indonesia reported a 13.76% inflation rate for the rice commodity in August, which contributes to 0.25% year on year. So, is there any specific factors that have led to this figure being the highest since August 2012?
Yeah, I think in 2012, El Nino played a role in increasing rice prices. And then this situation actually is similar to this year. But however, this year condition, I think with regard to BMKG, the El Nino index is observed to be higher than 2012. Yeah? And then in addition to that, I think there are several factors that have contributed to the rising rice prices. As I mentioned earlier, I think this will lead to the shortage or the declining stocks of rice in domestic.
So what are the potential consequences if the commodities price doesn't stabilize?
So actually, if the prices continue to rise, we anticipate that inflationary pressure will increase towards the end of this year and then the beginning of next year. And then we hope that the harvest season in February to April next year is likely to be the earliest opportunity to bring down the rice prices. But nevertheless, the inflation pressure or the inflation rate is still expected to be around 3% by the end of this year and then end of like next year, because we're expecting that the government and then Bank Indonesia will also to coordinate about the supply of these food commodities. So in order to mitigate the shortage, I think the government will do some kind of imports to stabilize the prices of rice.
Yes, and as we know that the rice itself is a core consumption for a lot of Indonesians, right? And this impacts a lot of people. Now, you mentioned about some efforts that the government can do, which is importing rice as well, right? And this is reported that Bulog and the Trade Ministry also have announced to provide 1.6 million tons of rice from the national stockpile, because as you mentioned, during the El Nino season, we usually actually stock the result of the rice to be released during the El Nino season. Do you think this will help to stabilize the price in some sense?
So actually, based on the latest data, September 22nd, the Bulog stock is around 1.72 million tons. And then there are contracts for the imports totaling 1.85 million tons, with 1 million tons are already realized. So we believe that the sufficient rice stocks, and then, but I think we need to improve the distribution from the distribution side, because if the government fails to maintain or to manage the distribution, I think this will keep the rise of prices to increase. And then, therefore, the effectiveness of distribution through market operations will be done by the Bulog, and then rice assistance program, our bansos, I think need to be improved, in order to maintain the purchasing power for the lower income people, because based on the state budget 2024, the government is expected to target the inflation at around 2.8%. Not to mention also the government aims to reduce the extreme poverty. So basically, the government has a priority to maintain the price stability for the food prices. So I think, including rice, so I think we believe that the government will do anything to support the purchasing power of low medium income people.
Yes, and when it comes to the global rice condition as well, we know that the rice price globally also reached a 15 years peak since 15 years, right? And a lot of the countries are doing this domestic focus policy where they wanted to maintain the safety of their own country supply, right? So can you share a little bit about the global rice condition and how each countries might be forced to solve its own issues?
I think the trend currently is driven by Russia-Ukraine war. Because of the deglobalization, each country currently focusing on self-sufficient themselves, in order to support domestic needs. But I still believe that although India, Myanmar, Russia, and then Arab United Emirates ban on the export of rice, I think we hope that, for example, like Thailand and Vietnam, still opening for the imports opportunity. So we believe that the stock of rice domestically, I think, could be maintained. And then going forward, I think the government also have to improve the production of the rice, because from time to time the agriculture sector, particularly for the rice, I think the production we still rely on the imports. So going forward, I think the government can adopt policies of food diversification nowadays, because we have to think about diversify the rice to other local food, for example, and then to promote innovation and then new agricultural technologies to boost the production, and then of course to expand the agricultural land, and then to provide intensive support for the farmers, because I think those policies has to be done by the government in order to to boost back the production in rice.
Yes, and do you have more view on increasing the productivity, right? We know that the productivity of rice in Indonesia is still quite low compared to other countries, despite us being one of the largest agricultural country in the world. Do you have any view on the things that the government can focus on? Because we know that it's not only about controlling the prices and inflation at the end, but also increasing productivity from the upstream side, right?
I think the first thing first, the government needs to do, I think, to improve the welfare of the farmers, because the farmers is the point, and then to give the subsidy for example, the fertilizer, because in the beginning era of the Russia-Ukraine war, we noted that the fertilizer prices also tend to be increasing. So the government need to stabilize or make sure that the fertilizer is cheap, in terms of farmers. And then the third one, I think the technology, because we can apply AI, for example, in order to boost the productivity of rice. And then, I think going forward, the government has to coordinate with the private sectors, for example, or the other startup, for example, in order to catch up the production, because I think the food sustainability or the food security is very important. Apart from the energy security. So I think we have to because agriculture, based on the structure of the economy, still contributes around 10 to 12% of the total economy of Indonesia. So I think in terms of the share of the cake, still big, but we still need to boost the productivity and then performance of the agriculture, because we have to rely on ourselves. So we cannot rely other countries going forward. So we have to boost the productivity domestic first.
One of the priority, and as President Jokowi mentioned, self-sufficiency of Indonesia 2045, right? And in going back to inflation, we know that the core inflation is a big part of it is determined by rice prices, right? And when we're talking about inflation itself, there's another factor is playing as well, which is we keep on looking at the Fed rate, interest rate, ECB's interest rate, and how do you see this factors plays out in relations to the pressure from increasing inflation from high basic commodity prices?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the capital market in the last couple of weeks and in the third quarter specifically, the market continued to correct in the stock market and then bond markets, including to rupiah, because rupiah with other Asian currencies currently depreciated against the dollars because of the concern of the increases in the food inflation due to the rising rice prices. Not to mention also, we noted that the oil prices, the Brent prices, for example, already broke the $95 per barrel price level. So we think that the inflation domestically, we still expect that the government of Indonesia still maintain the inflation at around 3%, as I mentioned earlier. And then for the Asian inflation, I think, of course, there is still inflationary pressure risk in the beginning of next year. But we expect that for the interest rate perspective, that from this month meeting, for example, like Federal Reserve decided to maintain the policy rate, but they're still open for the opportunity for the rate hike in the next meeting in November. So we still think that in the short run, I think domestic and then emerging countries still affected negatively by this concern or the risk-off sentiments. But after the clarity of the Fed rate path in the next year, although they mentioned that for the higher for longer, so we expect that after November rate hikes, they will maintain maybe sometimes in the several months until first half of next year. So we still believe that for Bank Indonesia, policy rate also is expected to be maintained at the current level, 5.75%, in order to anchor the inflation expectation, and then the second one, in order to maintain the rupiah stability.
Yeah.
So we're expecting, of course, we don't expect a huge significant rate cut next year because of the higher for longer Fed rate, but we're still expecting the rate cut to be done in the second half of next year because of the prices of the rice. We hope that in the second half also will stabilize, and then there is no further risk from the oil prices. So we're expecting that the inflation could domestically is still maintained at around 3%, although higher than this year, of course. But there is no urgency for Bank Indonesia to raise another policy rates in the next year. But room for rate cut is open, but maybe sometime around second half of next year.
Okay. So to conclude, the inflation would still maintain. There's a lot of options for the government to stabilize the price, and it's all the more important to keep the price of the rice stabilized, to also keep the inflation and interest rate maintained in Indonesia. Thank you so much, Pak Josua, for your insights this morning. We're now moving on to our next short break. But when we come back, we'll still have news from around the world. So stay tuned on the C Morning Show, only on C Today.